My son-in-law Trevor called me a worthless plumber in front of his billionaire friends. What he didn't know, he was standing on my yacht, living in my house and spending my money while saying it. My name is Harrison Clark. 5 years ago I had a choice, keep my fortune or save my daughter's life. I chose Grace. I liquidated everything, my entire pharmaceutical empire, to pay for her cancer treatment. Then I became a plumber and let the world think I was just another working-class failure. But here's the thing about kings who disguise themselves as peasants. They're still kings. And when the pretender to the throne gets too comfortable insulting royalty, well, that's when the crown comes back out. This story has more twists than a DNA helix, and trust me, the final revelation will leave you speechless. Quick favor before we dive in. If you're the kind of person who believes respect should be earned, not inherited, hit that subscribe button. I have a feeling you're going to want to hear how this ends. And drop your city in the comments. I bet half of you know families where the quiet ones turned out to be the most dangerous. Now let me tell you about the day Trevor Hamilton learned the difference between having money and being money. It was 3:30 on a Sunday afternoon when Trevor Hamilton decided to humiliate me. We were on the deck of Grace's Dream, a $9.2 million yacht anchored off Newport Beach. 14 guests stood around drinking champagne and admiring the Pacific view. Trevor had his arm around my daughter Grace, gesturing toward the horizon like he owned the ocean itself. "This is Grace's father," Trevor announced to his hedge fund colleagues, his voice carrying that particular blend of condescension and amusement. "Harrison Clark, just some plumber. Don't worry about him. He won't understand anything we're discussing anyway." The group chuckled. A few exchanged glances. One woman actually turned her back to me, as if poverty might be contagious. Trevor's chest puffed out with pride at his performance. I stood there in my work clothes, steel-toed boots, worn jeans, a simple blue shirt with H. Clark Plumbing embroidered on the pocket. To them, I was exactly what Trevor said. A working-class embarrassment who somehow produced a beautiful daughter worthy of their social circle. "Enjoy the yacht, Trevor," I said quietly. "I hope you're making the most of it." Trevor laughed. "Don't worry, old man. We are." He squeezed Grace tighter. "Grace and I have worked hard for this lifestyle. Some people understand success, others just fix pipes." The billionaires nodded approvingly. Here was their proof that hard work and intelligence separated them from the masses. Trevor was one of them. I was not. But Trevor had no idea what he just triggered. Grace defended her husband, of course. She always did. That evening, as we cleaned up after the guests left, she cornered me in the galley. "Dad, you embarrassed us today," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "Trevor works incredibly hard. He's a senior associate at Hamilton and Associates, managing a $15 million portfolio. Not everyone needs to live like it's 1950. I continued stacking plates, keeping my voice level. "Some things don't change, sweetheart. Character is one of them." "Character?" Grace's laugh had an edge. "Dad, Trevor bought this yacht. He pays for our house, our cars, everything. While you're out there fixing toilets, he's building our future." She didn't know. How could she? For 5 years, I'd watched my son-in-law spend money like water, taking credit for a lifestyle that quarterly distributions from the Grace Clark Memorial Trust made possible. 5 years of watching him treat me like hired help while living off my sacrifice. The trust fund, $45 million I'd established after liquidating everything to save Grace's life, generated approximately $125,000 every quarter. Trevor thought it came from some mysterious family inheritance Grace never knew she had. That's what the lawyers told them. That's what I'd instructed the lawyers to tell them. "Trevor's a good provider," Grace continued, warming to her theme. "He's given me everything I never had growing up. Stability, security, a real future." The irony cut deep. Growing up poor wasn't Grace's childhood memory. It was her current reality's foundation. 8 years ago, when she was diagnosed with acute lymphocytic leukemia at 22, I'd owned Clark Pharmaceuticals. We weren't poor then. We were worth $280 million. But watching your only child fight for her life changes your perspective on wealth. When the experimental treatment at Mayo Clinic cost $12.3 million and insurance covered barely half, I liquidated everything. The company, the investments, the real estate portfolio, gone. All of it converted to medical bills and hope. Grace survived. The company sale funded her recovery and created the trust that now bankrolled Trevor's arrogance. She thought I'd always been a plumber, that I'd chosen a simple trade over ambition. I'd never corrected that impression. Trevor entered the galley, sliding his arm around Grace's waist with practiced possessiveness. "Everything okay here?" "Just explaining to Dad how things work in the real world," Grace said. Trevor nodded at me with that particular combination of pity and superiority. "Harry, you did your best raising Grace, but she's with me now. I handle the big picture stuff." I dried my hands slowly, looking at this 33-year-old hedge fund manager who thought a $200,000 annual salary supported a $1 million lifestyle. "I'm sure you do, Trevor." What Grace didn't know could destroy her world. That night I called Janet Morrison at 8:15. Janet had been my legal advisor for 12 years, shepherding the trust through its complex establishment and managing the quarterly distributions that kept Grace comfortable. She answered on the second ring. "Harrison, how did the yacht party go?" "About as expected," I said. "Janet, I need you to review the trust distributions for this year. Something feels wrong." Papers rustled on her end. "Give me a moment. I'm pulling up case file C 2024-0891. A pause. "Harrison, when did you last review the quarterly statements?" "I don't micromanage, that's why I pay you." "You should see these numbers. The second quarter distribution was $125,000, as scheduled. But according to Wells Fargo Private Banking, only $95,000 reached Grace and Trevor's joint account." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Where did the other $30,000 go? "That's what I'm trying to figure out. Let me check the first quarter." More rustling. Same pattern. Distribution of $125,000, but only $98,000 reached their account. "Harrison, we're looking at systematic discrepancies." I set my phone to speaker and opened my laptop. "Send me everything. Account numbers, transaction dates, routing information. Already drafting the email. But Harrison, if this is what I think it is." "What do you think it is?" Janet's voice carried 20 years of legal experience. "Embezzlement. Someone with access to the trust accounts is siphoning funds before they reach Grace. And there's only one person with that kind of access." Trevor's face flashed in my mind. His confident smile, his casual dismissal, his assumption that money would always flow without question or consequence. "How much are we talking about, Janet?" "This quarter alone? $230,000 short. If this pattern holds for the entire year," she paused for calculations, "we could be looking at close to $1 million. The number hit like a physical blow. Not because of the money. I'd given up caring about money when Grace was dying. But because of what it meant. Trevor wasn't just disrespecting me. He was stealing from his own wife, taking funds meant to secure her future, and treating them like his personal ATM. "Janet, I need you to freeze the account first thing Monday morning." "Harrison, are you sure? Grace will have questions." I looked around the small apartment I'd rented after selling our family home to pay medical bills. Simple furniture, functional appliances, everything clean and modest. It suited me fine. I'd learned the difference between what you need and what you want. She'll have more than questions when she finds out what her husband's been doing. What about Trevor? He'll notice immediately. Let him notice. Maybe desperation will make him sloppy. After hanging up, I sat in my recliner and thought about chess. My father had taught me the game when I was 8, drilling into me that the most powerful pieces often move quietly until the moment arrives for decisive action. For 5 years I'd been playing defense, protecting Grace's happiness by staying in the background. The numbers Janet read made my blood run cold. Monday morning brought confirmation. Janet called at 9:42 a.m. with details that painted a picture of systematic theft spanning 18 months. Trevor Hamilton had been redirecting portions of Grace's trust fund distributions to a secondary account at Cayman National Bank, an offshore setup designed to hide assets from domestic oversight. "The pattern is sophisticated," Janet explained. "He's not taking everything, just enough to avoid immediate detection. 30 to 40,000 per quarter, routed through 3 intermediary accounts before landing in Georgetown." "How long has this been going on?" "Based on bank records since January 2023, total missing funds." She paused. $850,000. I closed my eyes. Nearly $1 million stolen from my daughter while Trevor played the role of successful provider.
Money that was supposed to ensure Grace's security, diverted to fund God knows what lifestyle pretensions. Janet, I need more than bank records. I need proof of criminal intent. Harrison, this is embezzlement, wire fraud, possibly tax evasion if he's not reporting the offshore income. But proving criminal intent requires more than account statements. Then get me more. I want to know where every stolen dollar went. Cars, trips, investments, gambling, everything. That kind of investigation takes time and resources. I have both. And Janet, I want this done quietly. Grace doesn't know yet, and I want to control how she finds out. By Wednesday, I'd hired Roy Bennett, a private investigator specializing in financial crimes.
Roy had worked with federal agencies for 15 years before going private, and his reputation for thoroughness was worth his $500 per hour fee. Your son-in-law is living well above his declared income, Roy reported during our first meeting. Hamilton and Associates pays him $200,000 annually, but he's spending like he makes 10 times that. Roy spread photographs across my kitchen table. Trevor at Morton's Steakhouse dropping $800 on dinner. Trevor at a Mercedes dealership purchasing a $95,000 AMG sedan. Trevor at Tiffany & Company buying a $15,000 watch. All purchased with funds from the Cayman account, Roy continued. He's created an entire shadow lifestyle funded by theft from his wife's trust. The investigation revealed layers of deception that made my stomach turn. Trevor hadn't just stolen money. He'd crafted an elaborate fiction about his own success, taking credit for financial acumen while systematically robbing the woman he'd promised to protect. There's more, Roy said, producing another set of photographs. He's been meeting regularly with Melissa Crawford, a marketing coordinator at his firm, expensive hotels, weekend trips to Napa, jewelry purchases that don't match anything Grace owns. An affair. Of course, Trevor wasn't just stealing Grace's money. He was using it to fund infidelity. The betrayal was so complete, so thoroughly calculated, that for a moment I couldn't speak. How long? Based on credit card records and surveillance, about 8 months. He's spending approximately $5,000 monthly on this relationship, all sourced from the stolen funds. Roy handed me a comprehensive dossier. Financial records, photographs, timeline analysis, witness statements from hotel staff who recognized Trevor as a regular customer. The evidence was overwhelming, damning, and legally bulletproof. Mr. Clark, this is enough to put him away for 8 to 10 years on federal charges. I stared at the evidence spread across my table. $850,000 stolen. An 8-month affair. 5 years of lies and manipulation, all while treating me like some embarrassing relative who didn't understand how the world really worked. Roy, I want continuous surveillance for the next 2 weeks. Document everything. Every meeting, every purchase, every lie. What's the end game here? I thought about Grace, about the trust fund that was supposed to protect her future, about the husband who was systematically destroying both while making her feel grateful for his success. This wasn't stupidity. This was theft. The surveillance phase revealed Trevor's pattern with surgical precision. Every Tuesday, he met Melissa Crawford at the Marriott downtown, room 1247, paid for with funds stolen from Grace's trust. Every Friday, he moved money from the Cayman account to his personal checking, maintaining a careful balance that suggested experience with financial manipulation. Wells Fargo. Private banking cooperated fully once Janet provided federal court documents. The bank's internal investigation confirmed what we already knew. Trevor Hamilton had exploited his position as Grace's spouse to redirect trust fund distributions, creating a paper trail that would satisfy any prosecutor. The beauty of this case, Janet explained during our Thursday meeting, is that Trevor documented everything. Offshore accounts require extensive paperwork. Wire transfers leave electronic fingerprints. He thought he was being clever, but he was actually creating evidence. I hired 2 additional specialists, a forensic accountant to trace every stolen dollar, and a digital security expert to ensure our investigation remained confidential. The team worked with military precision, building an airtight case while Trevor continued his charade of marital devotion and financial success. Grace remained blissfully unaware. She posted Instagram photos from expensive restaurants, tagged location updates from weekend spa trips, shared selfies wearing jewelry that her own stolen money had purchased. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. My daughter was unknowingly documenting her husband's crimes against her. Roy's surveillance reports painted a picture of breathtaking arrogance. Trevor had convinced himself that his theft was justified, that he deserved Grace's money because he'd elevated her lifestyle and managed her finances responsibly. In recorded conversations with Melissa Crawford, he referred to me as Grace's pathetic father and joked about milking the family trust. He actually said that? I asked Roy. Verbatim. Tuesday lunch at Shutters on the beach. The old man fixed pipes while I built an empire. Grace deserves someone who understands real success. The recordings were legally admissible. California's one-party consent law meant Melissa could record their conversations without Trevor's knowledge. She'd been cooperating with our investigation for 2 weeks, apparently having developed concerns about Trevor's casual discussions of financial manipulation. Why is she helping us? Roy consulted his notes. She thought Trevor was legitimately wealthy. When she realized he was stealing from his wife, she got nervous. White-collar crime makes people uncomfortable when they're not getting a big enough cut. By the end of week 2, our evidence file contained asterisk bank records documenting $850,000 in redirected funds, asterisk. Offshore account statements showing systematic money laundering, asterisk. Surveillance footage of undocumented luxury purchases, asterisk. Audio recordings of Trevor admitting to financial manipulation, asterisk. Hotel receipts and credit card statements documenting an extramarital affair, asterisk. Digital forensics proving Trevor's exclusive access to the compromised accounts. Janet prepared federal criminal referral documents. Roy compiled his surveillance reports. The forensic accountant created detailed transaction analyses that would make a jury understand exactly how Trevor had betrayed Grace's trust. "We're ready," Janet announced. "But Harrison, once we trigger this, there's no going back. Grace will lose her husband, her lifestyle, and her illusions about both." I thought about my daughter. Brilliant, loving, trusting Grace, who'd survived cancer only to be betrayed by the man she'd married during her recovery. She deserved the truth, but the truth would devastate her. She'll also lose a thief and a liar, and she'll blame you for destroying her marriage. That was the risk I'd been weighing for weeks. Grace might hate me for exposing Trevor's crimes. She might choose denial over truth, loyalty over justice, but I couldn't let her husband continue stealing her future while humiliating me in front of his business associates. "Janet, prep the paperwork for federal prosecution. I want Trevor arrested on wire fraud charges." "When?" I considered timing. Trevor had mentioned a dinner party with his hedge fund colleagues, scheduled for the following Saturday at Ocean View Restaurant, a public setting where his professional reputation would matter. A gathering that would include witnesses whose testimony could prove that Trevor had used stolen funds to project an image of success. Next Saturday, during his dinner party. Harrison, that's theatrical. It's appropriate. Trevor humiliated me in front of his friends. Now they'll watch him get arrested for stealing from his wife. Roy nodded approvingly. Public arrest sends a message. Other potential financial criminals see consequences in their own social circle. Plus, I added, it ensures Trevor can't claim he was planning to return the money, or that this was all a misunderstanding. He'll be actively spending stolen funds at an expensive restaurant, projecting success built on theft. Janet made notes. I'll coordinate with federal prosecutors, wire fraud and money laundering charges, with enhancement for systematic criminal conduct. Trevor's looking at 8 to 10 years federal time. Trevor's spending spree was about to hit a wall. Saturday evening, I arrived at Ocean View Restaurant at 7:30 p.m. The maitre d' recognized me, not surprising since I'd made the reservation under my own name and specified the private dining room where Trevor's hedge fund colleagues were celebrating their quarterly performance. Grace looked beautiful in a black dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Trevor wore a custom suit and the $15,000 Rolex he'd purchased with stolen funds. They were holding court at a table of 8, all successful finance professionals who viewed Trevor as a rising star in their industry. I approached their table quietly. Trevor saw me first, his expression shifting from confusion to annoyance. "Harry?" Trevor's voice carried across the dining room. "What are you doing here?" "We need to talk, Trevor." Grace stood up, clearly embarrassed. "Dad, this is a business dinner. Can't this wait?" "No, sweetheart, it can't." Trevor's colleagues watched with the polite interest of people witnessing family drama they'd rather avoid. I could see them categorizing me, the working-class father-in-law who didn't understand boundaries or appropriate social behavior. "Trevor," I said, keeping my voice level, "we need to discuss your financial management." Trevor laughed, the sound carrying just enough condescension to remind his colleagues why he belonged at their table while I did not. "Harry, I don't take financial advice from plumbers. Maybe we can talk about your business sometime. I hear pipes are always breaking somewhere." His colleagues chuckled. Grace looked mortified. This was exactly the dynamic Trevor had cultivated. The sophisticated young professional, married to a woman whose embarrassing father occasionally appeared to remind everyone of her humble origins. "Actually," I continued, "I'm specifically interested in your management of Grace's trust fund distributions." The laughter died. Trevor's expression hardened slightly, but he maintained his confident smile. "I manage our finances very responsibly, Harry. Maybe you don't understand how modern portfolio management works. I understand that $850,000 is missing from Grace's accounts." Silence fell over the table like a physical weight. Grace went pale. Trevor's colleagues exchanged glances. This wasn't family drama anymore. This was potential criminal allegation. "Dad," Grace whispered, "what are you talking about?" Trevor recovered quickly, his voice gaining that authoritative tone he used to establish dominance in professional settings. "Harry, you're embarrassing yourself. And you're embarrassing Grace. I think you should leave." "I think you should explain where Grace's money went, Trevor." "What money?" But Trevor's voice had lost some of its confidence. "The quarterly distributions from the Grace Clark Memorial Trust. The $125,000 that's supposed to reach Grace's account every 3 months. The money that's been disappearing into offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands?" Trevor's face went white when I mentioned the numbers. One of his colleagues, a senior partner at Goldman Sachs, leaned forward slightly. "Trevor, is there something we should know about?" Grace grabbed my arm. "Dad, stop. You're humiliating us. Grace, your trust fund has been systematically looted by your husband. $850,000, redirected to offshore accounts, and used to fund the lifestyle Trevor's been taking credit for." Trevor stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Harry, you're talking about things you don't understand. Grace, we're leaving." "Actually," I said quietly, "we're not done." I pulled out my phone and played a 30-second audio clip. Trevor's voice filled the private dining room, recorded during his lunch with Melissa Crawford. "The old man fixed pipes while I built an empire. Grace deserves someone who understands real success. Besides, it's not like she'd notice a few thousand here and there from the trust." The silence that followed was deafening. Grace stared at her husband, her face cycling through confusion, recognition, and dawning horror. Trevor's colleagues looked like they were witnessing a professional execution. "Grace," Trevor said desperately, "this is taken out of context. Harry's obviously hired someone to..." "To what?" Grace's voice was barely a whisper. "To record you talking about stealing from me?" Trevor's confident mask finally cracked. "It's not stealing. It's our money. I've been investing it, growing it, building our future. In the Cayman Islands? Grace, you don't understand how sophisticated financial planning works. I understand that you just admitted to stealing from my trust fund." That was Trevor's last chance to come clean. The next 2 weeks brought Trevor's desperation into sharp focus. Instead of confession or contrition, he chose escalation. He began systematically undermining Grace's relationship with me, using emotional manipulation techniques that revealed the calculated nature of his character. "Grace, your father is trying to destroy our marriage," Trevor said during what Grace later told me was a 3-hour discussion that felt more like an interrogation. "He's never accepted that you married someone successful. This whole investigation is his way of breaking us up." Grace, torn between loyalty to her husband and the evidence of his theft, initially tried to find middle ground. She called me on Wednesday evening, her voice strained with exhaustion. "Dad, can't we handle this privately? Trevor says he can explain everything, make it right. Do we really need lawyers and investigators?" "Sweetheart, Trevor has stolen $850,000 from your trust fund and used it to fund an affair with his coworker. This isn't a misunderstanding, it's systematic criminal behavior." "An affair?" Grace's voice broke. "Dad, please don't lie to me." I sent her Roy's surveillance photos. Grace didn't call back that night. Thursday morning, Trevor played his final card. He issued Grace an ultimatum that revealed exactly who he'd always been beneath the sophisticated exterior. Grace, choose, him or me. I won't be disrespected by some failed businessman who thinks fixing pipes qualifies him to question my financial decisions. The irony was staggering. Trevor demanding respect while standing in a house paid for with money stolen from Grace's trust fund, wearing clothes purchased with embezzled funds, driving cars bought with his wife's inheritance. Trevor, the evidence is overwhelming. Dad has bank records, surveillance footage, audio recordings. Your father is bitter about his own failures. He sold his little plumbing supply company and now he resents successful people. I've given you everything, Grace. A beautiful home, financial security, a lifestyle your father never could have provided. And that's when Trevor made his critical error. In his desperation to maintain control, he revealed information he shouldn't have known. Trevor, Grace said slowly, Dad never owned a plumbing supply company. Silence. He's always been a service plumber. Where did you get the idea he owned a company? I could almost hear Trevor's brain scrambling for an explanation that wouldn't expose how much investigation he'd done into my background. Investigation that would have revealed my pharmaceutical company history if he'd been thorough. I just assumed, someone with his attitude about money. But Grace was too intelligent to miss the inconsistency. Trevor, what exactly do you know about my father's background? That evening, Grace appeared at my apartment with red eyes and a suitcase. She'd spent the day asking Trevor questions he couldn't answer without revealing either his ignorance about my history or his knowledge about activities he claimed never happened. Dad, I need you to tell me the truth. About everything. About the trust fund. About your background. About what Trevor's really been doing. I made coffee and sat across from my daughter at the small kitchen table where I'd reviewed Roy's surveillance reports and Janet's legal briefs. Grace deserved honesty, even if it destroyed the protective fiction I'd maintained for 5 years. Grace, there's something about your trust fund you need to know. Just tell me, Dad, no more secrets. The trust fund doesn't come from a mysterious family inheritance. It comes from me. Grace stared at me. What do you mean? 8 years ago, when you were diagnosed with leukemia, I owned Clark Pharmaceuticals. We were worth $280 million. The words hung in the air between us. Grace's expression shifted from confusion to understanding to something approaching shock. Dad, I sold everything to pay for your treatment. The experimental therapy at Mayo Clinic, the medications, the extended care, it cost over $12 million. Your trust fund was created with the remaining proceeds to ensure your future security. Grace looked around my modest apartment. The second-hand furniture, the basic appliances, the complete absence of wealth she'd assumed I'd never possessed. You gave up everything. I gave up money to save your life. Best investment I ever made. Grace was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight I hadn't heard since her cancer diagnosis. Trevor knows, doesn't he, about Clark Pharmaceuticals? I don't think so. If he'd researched my background thoroughly, he would have found the pharmaceutical connection. But Trevor's investigation was probably limited to current assets and income. He was looking for weaknesses to exploit, not strengths to discover. He's been stealing from money you earned? He's been stealing from money meant to protect your future. Grace looked at me with tears in her eyes. Dad, what aren't you telling me? Grace looked at me with tears. What aren't you telling me? That night, Grace and I sat up until 3 a.m. while I laid out the complete scope of Trevor's betrayal. The offshore accounts, the surveillance footage, the affair, the systematic theft spanning 18 months, all of it documented with the precision of a federal criminal case, because that's exactly what it was. Dad, what happens now? Grace asked as dawn light filtered through my apartment windows. Now we finish this properly. Dr. Patricia Wells had agreed to testify about the timeline of Grace's treatment and my financial sacrifice. As Grace's former oncologist at Mayo Clinic, Dr. Wells had witnessed the liquidation of my pharmaceutical empire and understood the medical necessity that had driven my decision. Your father sold Clark Pharmaceuticals to Meridian Corporation for $280 million in March 2016. Dr. Wells would later tell the assembled dinner guests. The proceeds funded Grace's experimental treatment program. Total medical costs exceeded $12 million. But first, we needed to set the stage properly. Janet had coordinated with federal prosecutors to time Trevor's arrest for maximum legal and psychological impact. Saturday evening, Ocean View Restaurant, during Trevor's celebration dinner with his hedge fund colleagues. The same colleagues who'd witnessed Trevor humiliate me on the yacht. Harrison, Janet explained. The federal agents will enter the restaurant at approximately 8:45 p.m. Trevor will be arrested on wire fraud charges, with additional counts for money laundering and embezzlement from a trust account. What about Grace? Grace will witness her husband's arrest, but she won't be charged. Spousal victims of financial crimes aren't prosecuted unless they actively participated in the criminal scheme. Roy Bennett had positioned surveillance teams around the restaurant to document Trevor's final public appearance as a free man. The irony was perfect. Trevor would be arrested while spending stolen money at an expensive restaurant, projecting the success built on theft from his wife's inheritance. Everything's in place, Roy confirmed. Trevor has no idea what's coming. Friday afternoon, Grace made her choice. She called Trevor from my apartment, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to do. Trevor, I want to have dinner tomorrow night, somewhere special, with your colleagues. Grace, after everything your father's put us through, you want to socialize? I want to move forward. I want to show everyone that our marriage is stronger than Dad's accusations. Trevor, sensing victory, immediately agreed. I'll call Ocean View Restaurant. My colleagues will be impressed that you're choosing us over your father's conspiracy theories. After hanging up, Grace looked at me with an expression I remembered from her cancer treatment, determined, focused, ready to fight for her survival. Dad, when this is over, what happens to us? What do you mean? Will you forgive me for not believing you initially? I reached across and took my daughter's hand. Grace, you're not responsible for Trevor's crimes, or for trusting the man you married. But I chose him over you. I defended him when he humiliated you. You defended your husband because that's what good wives do. Trevor exploited your loyalty and love. That's his crime, not yours. Grace was quiet for several minutes. Dad, will you be there tomorrow night? Do you want me there? I want you to see justice done, for both of us. Saturday arrived with crystalline clarity, one of those California evenings when the Pacific stretches endlessly toward the horizon and everything feels possible. I dressed carefully in my best suit, a charcoal gray Armani I hadn't worn since selling Clark Pharmaceuticals. Grace wore the black dress Trevor had bought her with stolen money, but she'd removed all the jewelry he'd purchased with embezzled funds. She looked elegant and dignified, ready for whatever the evening would bring. Dad, are you nervous? I'm ready. We arrived at Ocean View Restaurant separately. Grace joined Trevor and his colleagues at their regular table. I took a seat at the bar, close enough to observe, but distant enough to avoid immediate recognition. Trevor was in his element, regaling his colleagues with stories of financial success and professional achievement. He'd ordered a $300 bottle of wine and was discussing his investment strategies for Grace's trust fund. At 8:43 p.m., two federal agents in dark suits entered the restaurant. They approached Trevor's table with the quiet authority of law enforcement professionals who'd done this hundreds of times. Trevor Hamilton? Trevor looked up, momentarily confused. Yes? Federal Bureau of Investigation. You're under arrest for wire fraud and money laundering. The restaurant fell silent. Trevor's colleagues stared in shock. Grace maintained perfect composure as federal agents handcuffed her husband of 5 years. Trevor Hamilton, you have the right to remain silent. Everything was in place for Trevor's final performance. Trevor was in handcuffs before dessert was served. As federal agents led him through Ocean View Restaurant, his hedge fund colleagues sat in stunned silence, processing the collapse of a man they'd viewed as a rising star in their industry. Grace remained at the table, dignified and calm, as if she'd been expecting this moment for months rather than hours. The other diners, finance professionals who'd built their reputations on judging character and assessing risk, suddenly realized they'd completely misjudged the situation. Mrs. Hamilton, Agent Sarah Chen addressed Grace respectfully, you're not under arrest. We understand you're a victim in this case. Grace nodded. Thank you. When will I be able to speak with prosecutors about recovering the stolen funds? The hedge fund colleagues exchanged glances. This wasn't the reaction of a shocked, betrayed wife. This was someone who'd been prepared for her husband's arrest. I approached the table as the federal agents departed. Trevor's colleagues recognized me immediately, the plumber they'd dismissed on the yacht just weeks earlier. "Gentlemen," I said, taking the seat Trevor had just vacated, "I don't think we've been properly introduced. Harrison Clark, Grace's father." Richard Steinberg, the Goldman Sachs senior partner, was the first to recover his composure. "Mr. Clark, we had no idea about Trevor's activities." "Of course not. Trevor was very good at projecting success while hiding its criminal foundation." "The offshore accounts," another colleague said slowly. "The luxury spending, the lifestyle that never quite matched his income. We should have asked more questions." Trevor was systematic about his deception. He counted on your professional courtesy not to probe too deeply into personal finances. Grace spoke for the first time since the arrest. "Gentlemen, my father and I would like to explain what really happened here tonight." Dr. Patricia Wells entered the restaurant at that moment, having waited outside until the arrest concluded. She approached our table with the medical records that would complete the story. "Dr. Wells was my oncologist at Mayo Clinic," Grace explained to the confused finance professionals. "She can verify the timeline of my treatment and the financial sacrifice my father made." Dr. Wells sat down and opened her briefcase. In 2015, Grace Clark was diagnosed with acute lymphocytic leukemia. Standard treatment protocols weren't effective, so we recommended experimental therapy that would cost approximately $12 million. She handed a set of documents to Richard Steinberg. Harrison Clark liquidated Clark Pharmaceuticals to fund Grace's treatment. The company's sale to Meridian Corporation generated $280 million in proceeds. "Clark Pharmaceuticals?" Richard's voice carried new understanding. "You're that Harrison Clark? The CEO who developed the revolutionary cancer treatment protocols?" "Former CEO," I corrected. "I sold the company to save my daughter's life." The pieces fell into place for Trevor's colleagues with startling clarity. The plumber they dismissed was actually a pharmaceutical industry pioneer who'd sacrificed a $280 million empire to save his child. The mysterious trust fund Trevor had been stealing from was actually Grace's inheritance from that sacrifice. "Trevor knew none of this?" asked another colleague. "Trevor never investigated deeply enough to discover my pharmaceutical background. He saw a working-class father-in-law and assumed that was the complete story." "But you let him humiliate you." "I was testing his character. For 5 years, I wanted to see how Trevor would treat someone he perceived as beneath his social status." Dr. Wells continued, "The trust fund Trevor embezzled from was created with proceeds from Harrison's company sale. Every dollar Trevor stole was money Harrison earned by building one of the most successful pharmaceutical companies on the West Coast." Grace added quietly, "Trevor spent 5 years taking credit for a lifestyle funded by my father's sacrifice, while treating my father like an embarrassment." The hedge fund colleagues sat in silence, processing the complete reversal of everything they believed about the family dynamics they'd witnessed. The successful son-in-law was a thief. The embarrassing father-in-law was a billionaire. The mysterious trust fund was the product of parental love and sacrifice. The billionaire friend stood up. "We've been waiting to meet you again, Harrison." Richard Steinberg was the first to stand. "Harrison, I remember now. Clark Pharmaceuticals' breakthrough in cancer immunotherapy. We tried to recruit you for Goldman's healthcare investment division in 2014. You offered me a consulting position, I recalled, $2 million annually to advise on pharmaceutical acquisitions. You turned us down because you wanted to focus on research rather than profit optimization." The other colleagues began connecting dots they should have seen earlier. My casual references to medical terminology, my understanding of regulatory processes, my calm authority when discussing complex financial matters, all signs that I possessed expertise far beyond what a service plumber would typically demonstrate. "Dr. Wells," asked Margaret Foster from Merrill Lynch, "what was the outcome of Grace's treatment?" "Complete remission. Grace has been cancer-free for 7 years thanks to the experimental protocols her father's sacrifice made possible." Grace reached over and took my hand. "Dad sold his life's work to save mine. Trevor has been stealing from that sacrifice." Dr. Wells produced additional medical documents. "The total treatment cost was $12.3 million. Harrison paid every bill in full, then established the trust fund with remaining proceeds to ensure Grace's long-term financial security." which Trevor systematically looted, I added. $850,000 redirected to offshore accounts and used to fund an extramarital affair. The silence stretched until Richard finally spoke. Harrison, we owe you an apology. All of us. We witnessed Trevor's disrespect and said nothing. You believed what Trevor wanted you to believe. He was very skilled at constructing false narratives about success and failure. Margaret Foster consulted her phone. The arrest will be in financial news by morning. Trevor's career is over and his firm will face regulatory scrutiny for employing someone who committed systematic fraud. What about Grace? Asked another colleague. Will she face charges? Agent Sarah Chen had returned to the restaurant and overheard the question. Mrs. Hamilton is a victim, not a criminal. She had no knowledge of her husband's embezzlement scheme. In fact, her cooperation with our investigation was instrumental in building the case. Grace smiled sadly. I spent 3 weeks gathering evidence against my own husband. Bank statements, credit card records, proof of the offshore accounts. Everything my father's legal team needed to ensure Trevor's conviction. Why? Richard asked. Because marriage isn't supposed to be built on lies and theft. Trevor betrayed me, my father, and everyone who trusted him. Dr. Wells packed up her medical records. Grace learned strength during her cancer treatment. She knows the difference between fighting for something worth saving and recognizing when something is beyond redemption. Agent Chen provided final details about the federal case. Trevor Hamilton will face charges of wire fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement from a trust account. Given the systematic nature of the crimes and the amount stolen, he's looking at 8 to 10 years in federal prison. What about the stolen money? Grace asked. Asset forfeiture proceedings will recover most of the stolen funds. The offshore accounts are already frozen, and we're working with Cayman authorities to repatriate the money to your trust fund. I looked around the table at Trevor's former colleagues, successful, intelligent professionals who'd been completely deceived by systematic manipulation. Trevor counted on your assumptions about class and success. He presented himself as someone who belonged in your world while treating me as someone who didn't. We failed a basic character assessment, Richard admitted. We judged you by your work clothes instead of your actual achievements. Trevor made that easy for you. He created a narrative where his success justified disrespecting anyone he considered inferior. Grace spoke quietly. Dad never defended himself when Trevor insulted him, never mentioned his pharmaceutical background or his sacrifice for my medical treatment. He let Trevor reveal his true character without interference. Sometimes, I said, the best way to expose someone's character is to let them think their audience doesn't matter. Margaret Foster shook her head. Trevor humiliated you in front of billionaire friends, not knowing we were actually your former business associates and potential partners. The irony was perfect. Trevor was seeking status validation from people who already knew my professional reputation. Agent Chen prepared to leave. Mr. Clark, we'll need your testimony for the federal trial. Your pharmaceutical industry background and the medical necessity that drove the company sale will be crucial for the prosecution. I'll be there. As the evening concluded, Richard Steinberg handed me his business card. Harrison, when this legal matter is resolved, I'd like to discuss some opportunities. We're looking for pharmaceutical expertise for our healthcare investment fund. I'm retired, Richard. You're 59 years old and you've built one of the most successful cancer treatment companies in history. Retirement seems premature. Grace squeezed my hand. Dad, maybe it's time to consider returning to work you actually enjoy. I looked at my daughter. Brilliant, strong, courageous Grace, who'd survived cancer and would now survive divorce. She deserved better than watching her father fix pipes while her husband stole from her trust fund. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find what matters. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of the Grace Clark Recovery Foundation, watching construction workers install the sign that would mark our official opening. The foundation occupied 3 floors of a medical building in Newport Beach, with research laboratories, patient consultation rooms, and administrative offices for the team of oncologists and researchers I'd assembled. Grace walked through the lobby, reviewing architectural plans for the patient family residence we'd break ground on next month. Her divorce had been finalized 3 weeks earlier, with Trevor signing papers from federal prison where he was serving an 8-year sentence for wire fraud and embezzlement. Dad, Dr. Martinez wants to discuss the clinical trial protocols for the new immunotherapy research. I nodded, adjusting my white coat. Returning to pharmaceutical research after 8 years felt natural, like picking up a conversation that had been temporarily interrupted. The foundation gave me purpose beyond profit. We were developing cancer treatments that would be freely available to patients regardless of their financial circumstances. Any word from the Mayo Clinic collaboration? Dr. Wells says they're excited to partner with us on the leukemia research program. They want to name it the Grace Clark Memorial Research Initiative. Grace smiled. I'm not dead, Dad. No, but the old Grace died when Trevor was arrested. The woman standing here now is stronger. The foundation had been funded with recovered assets from Trevor's conviction and a substantial personal investment from my renewed pharmaceutical consulting work. Richard Steinberg's healthcare investment fund had offered me a 7-figure annual consulting contract, which I'd accepted with the condition that all profits would support cancer research. Grace had also changed. The betrayal had initially devastated her, but recovery had brought clarity about relationships, values, and the difference between love and manipulation. She'd enrolled in law school, specializing in financial crimes and victim advocacy. Trevor called yesterday, Grace mentioned casually. I looked up from my research notes. Oh? He wanted to apologize, said prison had given him time to think about what he'd done. What did you tell him? I told him that apologies don't restore stolen money or rebuild broken trust. He had his chance to be honest, and he chose theft instead. Grace had learned the most important lesson from Trevor's betrayal. Forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation, and healing doesn't depend on the perpetrator's remorse. She'd rebuilt her life on her own terms, without needing Trevor's validation or apology. The Foundation Board wants to discuss expanding our research into pediatric oncology, I said, changing the subject. That would be meaningful work. It would also be expensive work, but Richard's fund is committed to long-term investment in cancer research, and we have other pharmaceutical companies interested in partnership. The Grace Clark Recovery Foundation represented everything I'd hoped to achieve when I first entered pharmaceutical research 30 years earlier: meaningful scientific progress in cancer treatment, accessible patient care, and financial sustainability through ethical business practices. Grace checked her watch. I need to get to law school. Professor Williams is lecturing on white-collar crime prosecution today. Learning anything useful? I'm learning how to help other families avoid what happened to us. After Grace left, I stood in the foundation lobby and thought about the previous year's journey. Trevor's betrayal had forced me to stop hiding my pharmaceutical background and return to work that matched my expertise and passion. Grace's strength during the crisis had reminded me why I'd sacrificed everything to save her life. The Foundation's mission statement hung on the lobby wall: advancing cancer research through scientific excellence and ensuring that no family faces financial ruin when fighting for a loved one's life. Trevor was serving 8 years in federal prison. Grace was building a career in legal advocacy. I was developing cancer treatments that could save other people's children. Sometimes justice looks like consequences. Sometimes it looks like moving forward.